as I said, my name is John Engel. I'm part of the study team, and with us on the panel is Julie Malachik, who's assisting us in the public involvement coordination effort. And then the department's team consists primarily of Adele Phillips as the primary contact, Michelle York, who's on the call today and has been vital in all the communications. And then Elijah Kaufman is also helping. And then we've got a special guest today, Katie Ringland, who has been on the calls. But Katie is really going to walk through a lot of our information for today's call. And she's the supervisor of the Floodplain Management Group. And for those of you that may not have had the opportunity to work with her. So, Katie, do you want to advance to the agenda, and I can kind of highlight some of the key elements? Perfect. So, yeah, I'll walk through this quick, and then and the goals. Covered the welcome and introductions. Appreciate your patience with us. Katie's really going to present a lot of really good information on the federal regulatory framework and capabilities, state regulatory framework and capabilities, and local capabilities. And then at the end of that discussion, we've got some questions based on that we'd love to hear from you. Recognizing that your work in floodplain mitigation, flood mitigation efforts from all different angles, I guess, from local floodplain administrator to emergency management, and so we're really anxious to get your input on that. And then I'll close by giving you an update on the ongoing efforts. And then next steps that we'll be working on leading up to our next meeting in February, which will be the 5th meeting of this group. So, Katie, if you want to switch it over to the goals, and I can hit on those kind of on a high level. So as I said, Katie's going to provide a lot of information on the state, federal, and local capabilities for flood risk identification and reduction. And our intent today is, the lens we kind of want to look through is in that vein, and we're not really going to get into emergency management and disaster response as much. And then I mentioned the feedback that we're looking for, and just to kind of give you a preview and things to think about as Katie's walking through this information is, we're going to talk about floodplain standards and, should Nebraska consider more stringent standards? We're going to talk about and discuss if there's opportunities for improvement in floodplain program of the department or regulation of floodplains or the administration of the NFIP in Nebraska. We're going to be looking for ideas on potential training and educational topics. And then we're going to talk about it on the funding side if Nebraska should consider a dedicated funding stream related to flood hazard mitigation. So those are some of the comments that are questions that we're going to be looking for input on for you to think about as Katie's presenting. Just for your information, following the meeting, we will be there. Following Katie's presentation, for the discussion item, we're going to have a series of questions that we're going to, given time today, we'll walk through and take feedback on. We're going to follow up after this meeting and send that out in a Survey Monkey form so you can kind of think on it a little bit and provide some thoughtful input on your own time. And I just want to give you a heads up that we'll be asking those questions now, but there will be another opportunity that we'll distribute to all of the stakeholders on the list to gather their input on these elements. So that's a little preview of what the goals of today are. And with that, I'll turn it over to Katie.
Thanks, John. So those of you that don't know me, I'm Katie Ringland. I'm the Chief of Floodplain Management. I'm also the National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator for the state. And one of the big pieces of legislation that required us to update the plan, the flood mitigation plan, was to look at our regulatory framework. And then what we found looking at this is these two things really go hand in hand. It is the regulatory framework that gives us the capabilities that we have to really do the floodplain management program in Nebraska. So today I'm going to start at the federal level. That's kind of the overall umbrella. They're the ones that kind of come up with the nationwide standards, but they allow the states to come up with more restrictive standards, and our state restrictive standards. And so I'm going to kind of walk through the capabilities and also the regulatory. So the flood insurance program was created in 1968 following several historical floods. And the purpose was to provide flood insurance as a means of disaster, create a national standard of management programs for the nation, distribute the responsibility of floodplain management at all government levels, and initiate the flood risk mapping program. So the NFIP program was really and is a voluntary program. Participation occurs at the community level though. So even though there's those different elements, the community level that actually goes into agreement to participate. And they do this by adopting a floodplain management ordinance. They then adopt a resolution participating in the national flood program, and then they complete that application for participation. So who is considered a community under the National Flood Insurance Program? And really that is a city, a town, a village, an Indian tribe, counties, the state. It is essentially any political entity that has the authority to adopt and enforce a floodplain management ordinance for their jurisdiction. So before we get any further, I want to go ahead and define some of the main NFIP terminology that we're going to hear throughout this presentation today. The first one is the base flood, and this is the flood that has the 1% chance of being equal or exceeded in any given year. The base flood elevation is the height of that flood, so that's how high it gets. And the special flood hazard area is going to be the area that flood covers, and it is shown on the flood hazard boundary maps and the flood insurance rate maps. The flood insurance rate map is FEMA's official map that shows the regulatory floodplains for regulating the National Flood Insurance Program. And then development, I'm going to go ahead and just read this definition because it's so important. It's any man-made change to improve or unimproved real estate, including but not limited to buildings or other structures, mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavation, drilling operations, or the storage of equipment or materials. So anything is considered development in the floodplain. So back to that participation. So part of that adoption of a resolution is to say that you are going to adopt and enforce all applicable NFIP regulations. As a community, you're requiring permits for all development, as we just defined. You are also going to get proof of compliance for each of those permits. You're going to maintain your floodplain management records, and it also says that they have to be available for review by both the federal and state entities. And then you're going to help residents obtain information on flood hazards, floodplain mapping data, flood insurance, proper construction, and so on. So an overview of the federal requirements, and I am not going to go into the depth on this. I'm just going to give you kind of the cornerstone, kind of the basis of them. But all first floor of new or substantially improved or damaged structures must be elevated to or above the base flood elevation. And remember, that's that regulatory flood and how high it gets. Non-residential structures may be dry floodproof though, to this elevation. Structures must be designed to be reasonably safe from flooding. So that's withstanding hydrostatic, hydrodynamic, buoyancy forces. It's making sure that the materials and the construction methods minimize flood damage. And it's also watching those utilities, making sure they're designed and located to prevent water from entering or accumulating within components. There's no new development allowed in the floodplain that will cause the BFE to increase more than a foot, and that's anywhere along that stream. And then there's no new development allowed in the floodplain with a floodway that will cause any sort of rise at all. And last but not least, anything that's substantially improved or substantially damaged must be brought into compliance with all of the regs above. So what are FEMA's other capabilities? FEMA has several other programs that can be used to improve floodplain management programs. The first one is this Community Assistance Program. It's a state support services element. This is given to state NFIP offices, so the coordinating office for the National Flood Insurance Program. And it helps states proactively identify and prevent and resolve floodplain management issues for participating communities. And this is supposed to be happening before an event occurs. They also have what's called the Community Rating System. This is a voluntary incentive program on top of your NFIP participation. It recognizes and encourages community floodplain management practices that exceed the minimum requirements, and it does this by providing discounts on flood insurance within your community. Another program FEMA has is the Cooperative Technical Partners Program, and this is the program where you get grants for support of FEMA's Risk Mapping and Assessment and Planning Program, or risk map. And the purpose of this is to deliver high quality hazard identification and risk assessment products. And these are to be used in planning and also in regulatory efforts. Another thing that FEMA has is the increased cost of compliance coverage. This is included with all national flood insurance policies of structures located in high-risk flood areas. And what this does is that if a structure is substantially damaged, it allows policyholders to receive up to $30,000 for bringing that home or business into compliance. So if you remember, if it's substantially damaged, it's required to be brought into compliance. And so this is additional coverage with your insurance that helps with that. The other capability is the Hazard Mitigation Assistance grants. These are grants for funding eligible mitigation activities that reduce disaster loss and protect life and property. There's 4 of them. There's the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. This is given after a federally declared disaster. There's the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program, and now this one is being phased out. We still have grants under this program, but no new grants are being initiated. There's the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. This is for mitigating insurance or NFIP insured structures. And then there's the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, BRIC. And this one is in its 2nd year, and this is really for large projects to build infrastructure and resiliency within communities. Okay, I'm gonna pause. That was a lot. Is there any questions before I move on? I see one question about the PowerPoint. Yes, we will be sending this PowerPoint out with the SurveyMonkey, so you can refer back to if you need to. Is there any other questions? Michelle, it looks like Michelle Cock has one from Game and Parks. Can you unmute her? Michelle, you might have to put it in the chat. All right, so that's a great question. So who checks compliance with NFIP and how often? So we're going to get to that here in a minute, but there are several things. So both as part of that CAP SASE program or the Community Assistance Program, the state gets money to do that. And then also the federal government will do that. And it's really kind of based on like how many permits that you are writing, if there's any indicators through other programs that your community might need some help. So it's based on the need and the staffing is available to provide those compliance checks. DNR really tries to check in with our community, all of our communities, at least once every 5 years, if that gives you an idea. So, all right, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to move on. So state regulatory framework and capabilities. So the Nebraska Floodplain Management Program was created by legislation in 1967 through the Nebraska Floodplain Regulations Act. And it was to accelerate mapping in flood-prone areas, assist local governments in implementing floodplain management programs, assure state lands, state-owned and state-financed facilities follow state minimum standards, and to encourage participation in the National Flood Insurance Program. And what I have on the slide there is actually exactly what's in the statute itself. The statute also names the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources as the state agency responsible for fulfilling, I can never get that, the statutory requirements. So what are our requirements? There is a lot of them. This is just a summary, but basically we are told to coordinate a statewide floodplain management program, to provide the state coordination for the National Flood Insurance Program. We are asked to receive federal funds to accomplish these floodplain management objectives, provide technical assistance to local, state, and federal agencies, identify and delineate floodplains and floodways, develop the minimum standards for floodplain management programs, and provide technical assistance for the development of flood mitigation programs, including administering FEMA's Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant. So under technical assistance, here are some of the activities that we really do under that umbrella, but it's much bigger than this, to be honest. So we provide base flood elevation data to local, state, and federal agencies, and this is based on the best available data at the time. One of the reasons we do this is the majority of our state is mapped in floodplains without a base flood elevation labeled on the map. And so we provide those for the purpose of administering floodplain management programs. We assist in monitoring floodplain management administration and enforcement activities. So this gets to that compliance question, Michelle. This is a big piece of what we do is walk in, meet with our locals one-on-one, go through their program, help them identify places that they need to improve on. And we also walk hand in hand with enforcement activities where we have issues. We assist communities in joining the National Flood Insurance Program, and we also assist them in joining the Community Rating System program. And then we review all floodplain management ordinances before adoption. And so it's something to remember is all communities have to have a review by both the state and the federal government, so FEMA, before they can adopt their floodplain management ordinance. So what does that look like? We also do educational workshops and trainings. We have a monthly virtual training. It's typically on the third Thursday of each month. I'll show you a slide on what we've been doing. We have in-person workshops twice a year. We have 2 coming up, one in January and one in February, if anyone's interested in those. We still obtain federal funds through FEMA. We attain the CAP-SASE one, and that one is really for the NFIP coordinating duties. And then we also do that CTP one to be able to map and provide support to our local communities. Just some statistics for you, so you get a picture of what that looks like. We have 418 NFIP communities in Nebraska. We currently have 2 applications into FEMA, so we might be up to 420 by the end of the year. We have 8,396 flood insurance policies in the state, $1.8 billion in insurance in force. The other one I like to point out is that total paid and claims at the bottom there of 95 million. And over half of that occurred in 2019. And I think that's an important thing for us to realize. So what do we have for CRS? We have 6 CRS communities. And you can see them listed there with the total savings they're giving their communities in flood insurance premiums. And I also like to point out that the city of Lincoln is a class 5. Class 5 is a really hard class to obtain. And they're in the minority in the country to be a class 5. So class 9 is where you enter. Class 1 would be the best. So that gives you an idea of where you are. And your percent savings changes by class. So the lower your class, the more savings you're giving your citizens with insurance. So technical assistance, so virtual monthly trainings. We started this last year as kind of a COVID thing of being able to provide basically trainings and things that we can do in person. And we had a huge turnout on this. People are loving the virtual training, so we're going to keep moving with these. This is a list of the ones we provided last year. We've already continued to provide them this year. And we had over 500 in total attendance last year, which was huge. We also host trainings with Nebraska Planning and Zoning Association, insurance agents, the Nebraska Association of County Officials, the Clerks Academy, as well as the Professional Surveyors Association of Nebraska. And so when we get people that come to us to ask to do presentations, we try to honor all of those as much as we can. So mapping capabilities. Most of our map is accelerated through FEMA's Cooperative Technical Partners Program. We get a lot of money through that program to do mapping. That money includes project management money and money to do community outreach and technical assistance. But one thing to note is even when CTP funds are not available, DNR continues to map flood risk within the state. So where are we doing mapping? Here's our current map of where we have projects going on. You can see that they're kind of spread out throughout the state, but I really want to point into the Elkhorns there. So the Elkhorns, we started those projects in 2017, a little earlier than that with some discovery meetings. After 2019, we had to put those projects on hold. And this was really due to large channel shifts within this watershed. And here's just an example. This is just northwest of West Point. And you can see that the channel here has shifted more than 300 feet. And so this made us have to wait on getting new LIDAR data, which is the topography that the mapping is done on, which has been delayed and delayed. The last delay is that we're supposed to be anticipating the rest of the LIDAR in February of 2022. So DNR is really gearing up to start this project again this spring. Another thing I like to point out is mapping prioritization is actually outlined in our state statutes. So our statutes told us what we need to consider when we determine where we're going to map next. And that includes the potential for future development, the potential for flood damage or loss of life, the probability that adequate data and maps can be prepared within a reasonable time by other sources, the availability and adequacy of the existing maps, as well as what data is available to produce new maps, and then what degree of interest do we have by the local governments? And that's a huge one. And so I always tell all my floodplain administrators, like if you have a need, make sure that Nebraska, the state knows that, so that we can keep track of those governments that want and need new maps. So where can you view this stuff? So all of these boundaries are viewable on our floodplain management interactive map. We have the flood awareness areas. So these would be the draft maps for mapping projects before they go effective or preliminary through FEMA's process. We have depth grids on there for where they're available, and all the regulatory maps are also located there. A new project that we're working on with a partnership with NEMA is the Nebraska Real-Time Flood Forecasting, or NERF. This is a project to provide pre-delineated inundation boundaries. So we're looking at every half a foot, staged for 48 gauges. This will benefit for 54 communities across the state. So basically, any community that had a gauge nearby that we could do this for, we included within this project. And it'll be on an interactive map where you can go and look at the boundaries, and you can put the slider up and down to determine what each of those stage looks like. So this will help with flood response in the future. When we get those flood predictions, we get them by stage. And so you'll be able to move that slider to the predicted stage to determine what will be inundated. Another project with a lot of interest from people is the Nebraska Regression Equation Project. This is being worked on in partnership with DOT, USGS, the Corps of Engineers, and FEMA. And this is really to produce new regression equations that are used for estimating flow in areas without gauges. Currently, we have like 7 different sets, excuse me. And so it's really hard to determine which one fits your area the best. And so this will actually replace all previous sets. And so this has been an ongoing project. Right now we're working on digitizing the streamlines, and this is proved to be time consuming, and it's also had some issues due to COVID and staffing. And so we're hoping to get this project back online, and then hopefully the RFP for this project will go out this spring yet. So NeDNR also has flood mitigation capabilities, and this is done through several different things. The first one would be the Governor's Task Force for Disaster Recovery. Many of you on this call today are part of this. For those of you that aren't, this is a group that includes several entities to guide the state through post-disaster recovery. And those groups are not necessarily state agencies. It includes state agencies, volunteer groups. There's just a ton of people included in that task force. Another group that we're part of is the Nebraska Silver Jackets program. We are the state co-lead with NEMA. And this is a team of federal and state partners that are working together to promote flood risk management. And I'll go through some of the projects here in a minute that we're working on. We also help communities through Risk Map identify potential flood mitigation projects and programs. And we administer the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant for FEMA. So Silver Jackets. Silver Jackets has lots of things going on, but recently we completed 4 projects. The first one is the Lower Platte River Pre-Development Risk Identification. And I smile as I say that because we're updating it again based on those 2019 numbers. And so that will be, my understanding is that should be finalized this spring before we pick up, I'm sorry, that's the wrong project. This one is completed. This is the Lower Platte. I'm thinking the Elkhorn project. I apologize. The Lower Platte River Pre-Development Risk Identification was completed and updated with the 2019 numbers in, I think it was October of 2020. And those can be looked at the Silver Jackets website. The Sandpit Risk Assessment and Risk Management Evaluation looked at Sandpit Lake developments and the risks that are posed on the type of building that's done there. So a lot of those are built on sand, and what does that look like with settlement and stuff like that, along with what kind of walls and stuff are put in place to keep that development from eroding. So that's an interesting study. The RIP Loss 2.0 project was to look at all the severely repetitive loss properties and repetitive loss properties in Nebraska and clean up our list. So there had been several of them that had been relocated or acquired, but were not taken off the list. And so the purpose of that was to clean up the list. The Wood River Flood Risk Identification Project. And then those being finalized include the Little Papillion Creek modeling and mapping. I don't know a ton about this project, but I believe that's a real-time inundation type project again. The Highwater Mark Archive Project and the Fremont Heck Life Sim Analysis. There's 4 ongoing projects. It includes the Educational Resource Toolkit, the Flood Mitigation History, and the Emergency Action Plan for Fremont and the Highwater Mark Signs. So these are ongoing projects, and if you want more information, I can give that to you guys later. So the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant is one that is administered by the Department of Natural Resources. So we are the applicant. State, local, and tribal governments are the sub-applicants. It is awarded yearly and is nationally competitive. In Nebraska, FMA is mostly used for acquisition or buyout, well, acquisition or buyout, same thing, or relocation of repetitive loss or severely repetitive loss properties. And that is because all the other projects we have a really hard time being competitive for under this grant. One of the largest buckets of points is for jurisdictions with 50 or more RL or SRL structures that have received individual assistance declaration for a flood in the last 10 years. This is 200 points that you either get or you don't. There's no like, you get 50. And this is a problem in Nebraska because we've only had 2 individual assistance declarations in the state, and one was in 2011 and the other one was in 2019. So what state higher standards do we have? So the Department of Natural Resources is required to come up with the minimum standards for programs in Nebraska. These are found in the Nebraska Administrative Code, Title 455. And so we require all new and substantially improvements of residential structures to have the lowest floor be built 1 foot above the base flood elevation. Same thing for non-residential, but we do allow them to be flood-proof to that same level, 1 foot above the BFE. We also required manufactured homes to be placed or substantially improved to be elevated on a permanent foundation such that the lowest floor of the manufactured home is 1 foot again above the BFE. We prohibit storage and processing of materials that are in a time of flooding, buoyant, flammable, explosive, or it could be injurious to human, animal, or plant life in the floodplain. And we also prohibit new and substantial improvements of structures for human habitation in the floodway. So just a little bit of more information on that. So the 1 foot above really comes in. If you remember, the federal government allows in the floodplain structures to create a rise of 1 foot. And so in Nebraska, to try to offset that, we set that as you have to build 1 foot above the BFE. So that's kind of where that 1 foot came from in 1967, to be honest. And then the other thing is this human habitation. So the floodway, if you remember, is the deepest and the fastest flowing water during a flood. And so it's the most dangerous place to be. And so to protect that, to allow for both the stream to move and get rid of that water, we prohibit that human habitation there. So other statutory items, and you already, well, you're going to see this again, but the duty of administering these is to the local government. So the state develops the minimum standards, but the local governments are required to administer and enforce it. Now, local governments can adopt higher and more restrictive standards, and it's encouraged. Now, all state agencies, boards, and commissions are required to get permits from local governments developing in both the floodplain or the floodway. And just to note, if a local floodplain management program does not exist, these agencies are required to self-permit to the state minimum standards. And so just as a reminder, DNR is here to provide technical assistance for state agencies that are trying to do that and need help. And then the only other thing I want to point out is that state agencies, boards, and commissions, only DNR can grant a variance to these agencies. If you go to a local government and it doesn't meet their ordinance and you can't meet it, you have to come back to DNR to get that variance. So where can you find this information? I have 2 links here. The top one is just the floodplain management statutes. It's pulled all of them that you need to actually run that program. And then the minimum standards, which is Title 455. All right, I'm going to pause again. Is there any questions on the state part?
Katie, there's a message in chat from Michelle asking if you could clarify how the BFE would be determined if there's a levy in place.
I see that. So Michelle, it kind of depends on where we're at. If we're in a zone A, which would be a floodplain without a base flood elevation, it'll be determined as if the levee's not there. If it's in a zone AE with floodway or a zone AE, it is actually modeled as if it's there, and then it's modeled again as if it's not. And you will be required to build to as if the levee's in place, because that'll be the higher BFE of the two. Okay, so the federal flood risk management standard, that's a really good question. I don't know a ton about it yet. I'm still studying it, but the one thing I do know is that it is requiring those projects getting funds to be 2 foot above the BFE. And I know that's the big one that we've been discussing internally and what that means for state regulations. If we should be moving to that to help projects move forward under that, or if we need to look at something different. But if you have specific concerns with that, I would love to hear what they are as we're learning and studying what that's going to look like. I'm going to pause a few more seconds to see if there's anything else. All right. Okay, this is the short. Oh, wait. Not in these funding mechanisms that are provided by, so the question is there any funding available to assist with private residents in cleaning out debris from waterways that run through their properties? And there is not in any of these FEMA programs that I am talking about today, or the ones that are run by the state. However, I do believe, and I would have to refer to both John and Adele, that in our plan, I think we have identified maybe some other sources that are available for that funding through other agencies and programs. All right, local regulatory framework and capabilities. So this really starts with the decision to join the National Flood Insurance Program. But the benefits of joining, so that's the first question is, why do I want to join, right? Well, first of all, it makes national flood insurance available to everyone, no matter where you are in the community. This is a big unknown. It's amazing how many people come to me and say, I'm not in the floodplain, so I can't get it. But the truth of the matter is, as long as your community is participating, you can get insurance, whether you're in the mapped floodplain or not. It also allows for federal grants and loans for development in these areas, so the special flood hazard areas. And these grants and loans are from Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, the Housing and Urban Development, and HUD, and then the Small Business Administration. It also provides federal disaster assistance for flood damage, and it's available for repair for the insurable private and public buildings identified in the flood hazard. So this would be public assistance, guys. If you have a huge portion of structures that are damaged in a flood event and you're not participating, you cannot get public assistance for those structures. Now, if it's outside of the special flood hazard area, you can still get assistance for that. So, federal mortgage insurance or loan guarantees, and these are written by the Federal Housing Administration, the Department of Veteran Affairs, the Farmers Home Administration, Small Business Administration, and Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac. So most of the time when you get a mortgage, your bank sells it to Fannie Mae or Fannie Mac, and that's not available if you're not participating and you're in the floodplain. So you saw this slide just a few back on the state one, but just to reiterate, it's the duty of the local government to administer and enforce the floodplain regulations adopted by the department. But I also want to remind you that DNR is here to provide technical assistance to make that happen. And then state agencies, you are required to get permits from local agencies, but local agencies, you are required to review those and you can deny them. So if you get a permit from a state agency and it's not complete, you are allowed to deny those and ask for more information. And then once again, local floodplain administrators cannot issue variances for state agencies. So examples of higher standards adopted by Nebraska communities, and this may not be all of them, but these are the ones that I'm aware of. So we have a few communities with a higher freeboard standard of 2 feet. So that lowest floor has to be 2 feet above the base flood elevation. We have communities with a cumulative substantial damage, usually over 5 years. So they look at any damage claims you've had over the 5 years, and if it's over that 50%, you're required to bring that structure into compliance. Compensatory storage. So if you take some storage out of the floodplain, you're required to put it back in elsewhere through your project. We have communities with designated setback requirements. A lot of times this is either from the stream center line or the stream bank, but you have to be so far back with any buildings. And then we have several communities actually with no mobile or manufactured homes allowed in the floodplain itself. The locals also have many other capabilities to help with floodplain management, and this is done through comprehensive planning. So when they're looking at that 5-year plan of where growth will be and what regulations need to be put in place, they can consider their floodplain and what that looks like. Zoning regulations, they can be used to steer development away from hazard areas or to preserve natural functions. Subdivision regulations can establish rules for drainage, emergency routes during flood events. Building codes can establish rules for ensuring properties are built safe from flooding. Hazard mitigation planning. This is a 5-year plan that can identify projects that will reduce risk within the community. Acquisition programs, programs that allow communities to buy and acquire land in the floodplain to preserve open space. It also permanently relocates these buildings. And then public education and awareness. Provide yearly mailings explaining the risk within a community, how to obtain flood insurance, and other prudent information. A lot of times we see these are kind of put into the water bill for the month, is how I've seen that done. And then emergency response. Excuse me. And this includes early warning systems or other emergency response capabilities. All right, any questions on that before I hand it back to John? All right, I'm not seeing anything, John, so I'm gonna let you take it away.
All right. Well, fantastic, Katie. Thank you for all that information. And I'm gonna plan a question with you, Katie, to think on. I'm not gonna put you on the spot, but when you were going through that, one of the things that you'll see in the plan document are some of the challenges to federal capabilities, state capabilities, and local capabilities. And it's one of the things that we'll want input on. And I'll come back to you, Katie, but if you can think of some of the challenges in executing your statutory requirements for the state, and I'll come back to you to maybe provide some of that information.
Sounds good. I'll be ready.
Okay. All right. A preview. So I also gave you all a preview of this, and here's some of the questions. And again, I want to reiterate, we'll be sending out this information, the PowerPoint, and in a SurveyMonkey link that'll have these questions in to respond to as well. But kind of wanted to walk through the questions that based on Katie's detailed presentation on the capabilities. The first questions were with regard to the administrative and regulatory elements. I think the next slide, Katie. One of them was she talked about what the federal standards are, and she highlighted those current higher standards that Nebraska has adopted. She outlined what some of the local communities have adopted that go beyond even the state standards. A gentleman brought up the federal flood risk management standard that's being considered for hazard mitigation grants. So this question is, are there particular higher standards that Nebraska should consider adopting? And that can be, any of those measures that you talked about, whether it relates to the base flood, cumulative damage, setback requirements, any of those elements. The second question is, where are the opportunities for improvement in the regulation or the administration regarding floodplains and floodplain development? And those improvements could be, whether there's statutory guidelines, whether there's permit reviews, ordinances, any of those elements that would assist you as local floodplain administrators or involved in flood hazard mitigation that would help regulate floodplains in the state of Nebraska. If I don't see any, feel free to enter comments in the chat if you'd like to bring forward for discussion as we go through. If not, I'll preview the remaining questions. And again, these will be in the SurveyMonkey format that we really need your input on. Katie, let's go to the technical assistance questions. So Katie went through, a lot of the efforts that the department goes through, everything from education to mapping to ordinances. What additional technical support would benefit flood hazard mitigation? And that could be either an enhancement on the current activities or that have been completed, as well as Katie highlighted some of the ongoing activities with the regression equation update and the kind of the real-time flood hazard mapping that are currently underway. What existing services could be enhanced, or what new services would benefit flood hazard mitigation. There's a couple comments coming in chat. One of them is keeping in mind the regulatory requirements. We should also look at the standards. This must relate to the more stringent standards. We should also look at the standards within RR 2.0 in mind to make sure that structures are built with the rating framework in mind. So that's a good input when we start looking at potential standards. And then there's also a comment in the chat that says, as a non-regulatory agency, USGS provides data and studies that provide information on flooding extent, duration, frequency before and after various flood hazard mitigation measures have been in place, supporting the flood risk assessment. Will these be listed under the federal capabilities section? And the answer to that is yes. The document, and we'll get to that, all of the information that Katie presented and the low federal, state, and local capabilities document, it's in tech edit right now. We were hoping to have it placed on the website for review, but it should be there by the end of this week. And under that, we do have the USGS and what their capabilities and the role they play in flood hazard mitigation. And Mr. Peterson, I would encourage you to provide any comments on that document and to make sure that we fully capture USGS's roles and capabilities. We have another question. Having a floodplain, this is under the technical assistance in a new service. It says, having a floodplain management specialist able to respond during events to areas affected. This person can help with conducting SDEs and implementing floodplain administration that don't deal with this on a regular basis. So that's more in the response during flooding events and being able to provide that technical assistance to those that maybe don't have the experience. So that's a great comment. Thank you. Katie, maybe the next question, we'll go through that and then I'll go back to the chat, was regarding flood hazard identification. And this relates to the first question relaying that are, you know, the DNR hosts a GIS-based platform that conveys this information. Are there alternative or improved ways in which you'd like flood hazard information conveyed? So that's more about the communication aspect and making sure that that information that you need is being provided, and is there a better format or way to do that? And Katie also walked through how by statute the prioritization of mapping priorities are determined and established, and in looking at that, how should future mapping projects be prioritized? Are there changes to the prioritization, or are there other factors, or maybe some of the factors that are considered are there priorities within the prioritization factors? So any thoughts on that would be appreciated. Going back to the chat, and how are basements handled within NFIP? Are new houses in the quote regulated areas allowed to have a basement? I'm wondering if there are needed regulations in this regard. And maybe Katie or Adele, would you like to talk about I guess from a state standard, how basements are treated?
Sure, this is me, John. So Michelle, basements are already covered. They're considered the lowest floor. So the lowest floor of any structure has to be above For federal at the BFE, but for the state of Nebraska, 1 foot above. And so really, in some places, a basement's not going to be allowed just because you can't get that far below the ground and still be above the base flood elevation. Hopefully that answers that. And then also to answer the next one, how do we get access to the GIS maps to help people understand not to build there? So Matt, I would recommend a couple different places to get that information. It can be viewed on our interactive map. You can see the regulatory boundaries there and any draft boundaries that are done. And you can also view that on FEMA's Mapping Service Center. You can actually download the GIS data to put on your own maps if you want there. And then you can also use the NFIP viewer, which is also going to allow you to view the regulatory maps on their viewer. I can get you all those links after the meeting if you would prefer.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I think we had a couple more questions to get through. The next one was on training and education. And Katie talked a lot about the monthly training opportunities provided and how well attended and effective they've been. So are there other training topics or educational issues that should be a priority or would support better flood hazard mitigation in Nebraska? And so any input on things that you would like me, maybe that question earlier about, you know, the during a flooding response and some of the floodplain administration lessons learned and educational elements would be useful. Moving on, we're running short of time. I want to hit these other two questions and give you an update. The next one is on funding, and in thinking about Nebraska and looking at other states, in Nebraska does not have a dedicated funding stream to support flood mitigation projects or other activities to mitigate flood hazards. Some other states have done that. And they can utilize it to support the required match required on some other grants. And they've had their own dedicated, kind of like the Water Sustainability Fund, only it would be prioritized and dedicated to flood mitigation. And so that was one of the questions when we talk about some of the challenges the local communities face in coming up with the local match requirements, not only for construction, but long-term operation and maintenance. Is that something that the state should endeavor to provide? So that we'd like your input on that one. And then I think we have one other question that I wanted to hit on, and it is what additional state capabilities, when we talk about all the things that Katie documented as far as flood hazard mitigation and flood mitigation planning, have we not covered, and that your agency may be involved with. And so I would encourage you as we send out the Survey Monkey and this presentation, the document, the sister document, section 6 of the plan, where we have, as I told Mr. Peterson, where we're documenting the federal capabilities. Please review that and provide any input on flood mitigation activities that you're involved with that we may not have captured in the document. So not only the presentation, but as you think of this question, please look at the document and either respond with comments on the document itself or in the Survey Monkey question, and we'll get that rolled into the section 6. So that's the questions that you'll be seeing. As I said, we're going to send out an email with a link to the Survey Monkey, this presentation. The document will be on the website. We're asking that if we could get comments back by the end of the year. So we've got a couple weeks here. That would really help us as we advance the document going forward. So a quick update on the ongoing efforts. Again, we've got the link there for we've got our risk assessment. We talked about that approach. That effort is underway, and we're going hot and heavy on that to provide information that will be part of our February meeting to look at the risk assessment, as well as the mitigation actions and the templates that will be part of the plan for all of the mitigation actions that we talked about at the October meeting. We should have a draft of those internally by the end of this month and be pushing those out in advance of the February meeting. The plan documents for review, again, they're all housed at the website, and there'll be the sections that'll be posted this week. Again, right now we're hoping to get comments by the end of this year. If for some reason we don't get them posted till later this week, we may push that deadline into the first week of January. But those first 5 bullets are really housed in this section 6, where we talk about the state, local, and federal capabilities, and what are the challenges to those capabilities. We also talk a little bit about the regulatory framework, and there's some information on each of these elements that we've talked about, and maybe and some examples of how other states have done it, and would certainly be interested in input that any of you have of effective programs and projects in other states that maybe should consider and be beneficial to the state of Nebraska. And then the upcoming next sections that we'll talk about in February are the mitigation templates and the results of the risk assessment. Next steps, we're going to be incorporating the comments on our mitigation strategies from October, our flood claims analysis, and the state, federal, and local capability assessment documents that we receive in January or the end of this year. We're going to complete the risk assessment in preparation for the February meeting. And that meeting will be on February 8th at 10 a.m. We'll talk about flood impacts and risk assessment. We'll talk about the mitigation strategies and the templates. And then we'll also hit local mitigation planning. And so I think that's it. There was one other comment that I wanted to hit. I think in general, our public needs to be better educated about how rivers function. In a previous slide, Katie showed how the Elkhorn River cut back into those sandpit lakes. Some people were surprised this happened, but for people who understand river functions, this seemed perfectly normal and should be expected. A little geomorphology 101 course, as it sounds like Michelle's advocating for. So absolutely appreciate that input. Again, we went about 5 minutes long. Appreciate your input. Again, if you have any questions, comments, reach out to anyone on the project team, myself, Adele, Katie, Michelle, and be looking for the Survey Monkey. And I'll, as always, thank you for your participation. That's all I had. Katie or Adele, any closing thoughts?
I don't have anything else. I'm looking forward to seeing what feedback we get, though. So thank you, everybody, for participating.
Great. And thank you, Katie. That was a tour de force of floodplain management in Nebraska. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is Adele. I guess just a heads up about information distribution. I think what we'll do is go ahead and email all of you with the slides and when the information is available. Since we don't have it on the website at this moment, we'll let you know. And then if that deadline changes for comment, we'll include that in that email. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you very much.